The USS Scorpion was one of only 2 nuclear submarines ever lost by the U.S. Navy. After being introduced in 1959, the skipjack subs remained the fastest subs in the U.S. Navy.
The USS Thresher was meant to change the future of naval power. Instead, it became a tomb. In 1963, during a simple dive test, it suddenly vanished. No mayday, no survivors, only a thunderous sound that shook Navy command. For decades, the U.S. Navy insisted the cause was a technical malfunction. But what if that wasn't the full story? Now, the mystery of the USS Thresher may finally be solved, and it's what many suspected, but dared not say. Was Thresher lost to a hidden flaw or something more sinister? Before we can understand what went wrong, we have to return to where it all began, to the moment the U.S. Navy set out to build a submarine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Birth of a marvel and underlying pressures. There was a time in the 1960s where silence meant survival, because beneath the waves, a different kind of arms race was unfolding. This race was not for the skies, but for the unseen depths of the ocean. The Cold War had split the world into 2 easy halves, each determined to outthink, outbuild, and outmaneuver the other. Nuclear deterrence wasn't just about missiles in silos anymore. It was about who could hide the longest, strike the fastest, and vanish before being detected. In this shadowy contest, the United States needed a weapon that could live undetected below the surface for months, track enemy vessels, and, if necessary, unleash destruction without warning. And from that fierce competition, the USS Thresher was made. Built at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Maine, the Thresher represented the cutting edge of American ingenuity. Her designers envisioned a vessel that would go farther and stay hidden longer than anything before. Her sonar could detect enemies long before they were heard, and her hull was designed to withstand the crushing forces of the deep Atlantic. To the Navy, she wasn't just a submarine. She was a promise that America could dominate the underwater world. The Thresher's construction pushed technology to the edge. Her systems were refined for silence, and her propulsion was tuned to hum instead of roar. Engineers experimented with new materials and techniques to keep her light yet strong. But with every advancement came risk. Each bolt, each pipe, and each joint had to hold under pressures that could turn metal into dust. Every decision mattered, and not all of them were perfect. To meet impossible deadlines, some shortcuts slipped through. Certain joints were silver brazed instead of fully welded because it is a faster process. However, it was not as strong when the ocean pressed from all sides, yet those choices saved time. They also planted seeds of danger that no one wanted to face. In the Cold War's rush to stay ahead, testing often bowed to urgency, and there was no room for delays when the enemy was building fast, too. Still, the mood around the Thresher was confident. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey, was experienced and respected. He was responsible not only for his 112 crew members, but also for 17 civilian specialists from the shipyard who were aboard to monitor the sub's systems during its post-shakedown tests. In total, 129 people would join her on her final mission. They had spent months in post-shakedown work at Portsmouth, fine-tuning systems and correcting issues from earlier sea trials. Now, after 9 months of adjustments, the Thresher was ready to prove herself. Once she was cleared, the next step was a deep dive test off the coast of Cape Cod. The goal was to take her down to 1,300 feet, close to her test depth, to prove that every part of her hull and systems could handle the immense pressure. But even before she left port, there were warning signs. Lieutenant Commander Harvey himself had raised concerns in earlier evaluations. One report highlighted a troubling issue with the submarine's auxiliary saltwater system, a network of pipes and valves essential for cooling and other vital operations. Harvey described the potential danger of flooding from that system as the most dangerous condition that exists in Thresher. He knew that if salt water leaked into certain compartments while the submarine was near test depth, it could lead to catastrophic failure. His warning didn't come from paranoia. It came from experience. Submariners understood how small problems could turn deadly underwater. A single leak at great depth could flood compartments within seconds, throwing off balance and power. The crew might not even have time to respond. Still, the mission went ahead. Confidence in technology, and perhaps a measure of overconfidence in human control, won out. After all, the Thresher was built to be the Navy's finest achievement. She was a symbol of progress, proof that American engineering could outpace Soviet innovation. Yet, as history would show, even the strongest metal can hide invisible cracks. As the Thresher prepared for her test dive, no one aboard could have known how fragile that confidence really was. What awaited them in the cold depths would challenge everything the Navy thought it knew about safety, design, and the limits of human control beneath the sea. And as the crew sealed the hatches and began their descent, the ocean waited silently, because somewhere in the metal veins of that powerful machine, the first signs of failure were already waiting to wake. The last voyage and disappearance. April 9th, 1963, began like any other morning at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. For the crew of the USS Thresher, this day marked a final test before the submarine would officially join the fleet as the most advanced undersea weapon the Navy had ever built. At exactly 8 a.m., the Thresher slipped away from the dock and headed for the open Atlantic. To those watching from shore, it looked like a moment of pride and progress. No one watching that morning knew they were witnessing her final journey. The Thresher was scheduled to meet with the USS Skylark, a submarine rescue ship assigned to monitor her deep diving trials. The plan was to perform a series of shallow dives to verify systems, rest at sea overnight, and then attempt the full test dive the next morning. The first day passed without trouble. The sea was calm, the systems checked out, and the crew aboard Skylark reported clear communication and steady conditions. By that evening, both ships were positioned about 220 miles east of Cape Cod, floating quietly in the dark Atlantic. When dawn broke on April 10th, the ocean was calm. From the look of things, nothing hinted at what was about to unfold. At 7:47 a.m., Thresher began her descent. The dive was carefully planned. It was scheduled for 100 feet at a time, with system checks at each stage. Skylark maintained contact through the underwater telephone, listening to the Thresher's reports as she sank deeper into the blue. The sound of hull compression was normal for that depth. It was a faint series of pops and creaks, the kind of noises submarine crews grew used to hearing. Everything was going according to plan, until it wasn't. At 9:09 a.m., the Navy's underwater listening system, known as Sound Surveillance System, SOSUS, picked up an unusual disturbance. Analysts later interpreted it as the Thresher attempting an emergency blow. This was an effort to force high-pressure air into ballast tanks to rise quickly toward the surface. 2 minutes later, at 9:11 a.m., SOSUS recorded the distinct silence of reactor coolant pumps shutting down. In the world of submarines, that was never a good sign. At 9:13 a.m., the Skylark received a faint, broken message through the static. Experiencing minor difficulties, have a positive up angle, attempting to blow. The tone sounded calm but strained. Even through the interference, it was clear that something serious was unfolding. The positive up angle meant the submarine's bow was tilted upward and she was trying to climb. The phrase, attempting to blow, meant the crew was fighting to regain buoyancy, to force air into the tanks and push back against the crushing weight above them. Somewhere inside that steel-pressure hull, 129 people were trying to outmatch the ocean itself. 4 minutes later, Skylark caught one last transmission that was barely audible and broken by static. Only a single word made it through clearly. 900. What did 900 mean? Was it the depth reading, a system code, or something else entirely? No one could say for sure. Before anyone could respond, SOSUS recorded a sharp, violent sound at 9:18 a.m. The signal matched the acoustic signature of an implosion and a catastrophic collapse caused by immense water pressure. And then, everything went silent. Up on the surface, the Skylark's crew kept calling out into the water, hoping for a reply. They released smoke markers and sonar signals, scanning the area for any sign of movement. Hours passed without an answer. The sea remained calm, indifferent, and empty, as if nothing had happened at all. By midday, hope began to fade. Other ships were dispatched to help. Aircraft circled overhead, searching for debris. The Navy's top brass were informed, and families of the crew waited by their phones, desperate for any update. But none came. Later that evening, the Navy released the news the world had been dreading. The USS Thresher was gone, along with all 129 souls aboard. No survivors. No wreckage visible on the surface. Only an empty patch of ocean, where one of America's most advanced submarines had disappeared without a trace. President John F. Kennedy ordered the nation's flags lowered to half-staff, a silent salute to the Thresher and her crew. It was the deadliest submarine accident in U.S. history, and the shock spread far beyond the naval community. The questions came quickly. How could such an advanced submarine vanish so suddenly? Why had the emergency systems failed? And if she had imploded, what had caused the chain of events that led to it? For now, all anyone knew was that the Thresher had gone silent somewhere far below the surface, in a place few would ever see. The ocean had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only static, uncertainty, and the faint echoes of her final words. And as the Navy began to search for answers, one truth became clear. The Thresher's last dive was not only a tragedy, it was a mystery waiting to resurface. When the ocean keeps a secret, it rarely gives it back easily. The Thresher's disappearance forced the Navy to look where no one wanted to go. Would they find proof of what happened, or nothing more than empty water and unanswered questions? The search. What they found. After the Thresher went silent, the United States Navy faced a grim reality. They realized that it wasn't just a missing submarine, it was a vanishing act on a scale no one could explain. Within hours, what began as a search and rescue turned into a massive hunt across the cold Atlantic. 15 ships were called into action. Destroyers, survey vessels, and deep-sea support ships fanned out across the ocean, listening, watching, and hoping. Every minute mattered, yet every minute that passed stretched the silence even further. The ocean was too wide, the technology too limited, and time was running out. In 1963, deep-sea search equipment was far from advanced. Sonar systems could only see so far. Cameras were bulky, slow, and easily blinded by the darkness of the deep. Even the most powerful tools of the time were no match for the ocean's vastness. It was like searching for a needle in a black abyss. Still, the Navy refused to give up. Somewhere out there, more than a mile down, lay the answer to what had happened to 129 souls. One of the ships leading the effort was the USNS Thresher, a research vessel equipped with some of the best instruments available at the time. It carried towed cameras, magnetometers, and acoustic sensors, all designed to scan the seabed for signs of wreckage. Thresher wasn't originally built for rescue. It was meant for ocean research. But now, it was the Navy's best chance at finding Thresher's final resting place. Over time, Thresher would become a prototype for future deep-sea recovery missions. But in this search, it became a symbol of determination. The Navy also brought in the bathyscaphe Trieste, a legendary deep-diving submersible capable of reaching incredible depths. Trieste had already made history years earlier by descending to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Now, it was assigned a different kind of mission. It was assigned to explore tragedy. In June 1963, Trieste was deployed to the suspected area, about 220 miles east of Cape Cod. It wasn't an easy assignment. Diving into that depth was dangerous because the risks were enormous. Yet for the crew aboard Trieste, it was simple. Their job was to find whatever was left of the Thresher and bring answers to the surface. For months, the search went on with no breakthroughs. Then, in June 1964, over a year after the disaster, the Navy finally found what it had been looking for. Deep down, roughly 8,400 feet below the surface, Sonar detected scattered metallic echoes. Cameras followed, sending back eerie images from the ocean floor. What they saw confirmed the worst. They saw the debris field. Pieces of the Thresher lay across an area spanning roughly 1.4 million square feet. 5 major sections were identified and spread out like the aftermath of an enormous explosion. Commander Donald Keach, a Navy officer in charge, later described the scene as looking like a huge automobile junkyard with big pieces of heavy metal all over the place. The wreckage was twisted and broken, scattered across the sea floor as if it had been torn apart mid-descent. It wasn't a single impact point, it was a graveyard of fragments. On another spectrum, the photographs that followed were haunting. The submarine sales section, marked clearly with the number 593, rested among the wreckage. It was unmistakable. The stern was crushed and twisted, showing signs of intense structural failure. Fragments of high-pressure air flasks were scattered around. Pieces of machinery, piping, and insulation told silent stories of immense force. Each image was another puzzle piece, pointing to a violent and rapid implosion. Yet even as the Navy examined the wreck, strange reports emerged. During the early days of the search, the crew of the USS Seawolf had recorded mysterious sounds like metallic knocks and rhythmic banging from the ocean. There were 37 sonar detections in all, some heard more than 24 hours after the submarine had gone missing. Could they have been echoes from shifting wreckage, or something else entirely? Some wondered if those sounds were desperate signals from trapped compartments, faint reminders that life might have lingered longer than anyone wanted to believe. The possibility stirred unease among investigators. Official reports leaned toward the explanation of collapsing structures and underwater echoes. Still, the uncertainty lingered. Communication logs noted attempts to interpret the sounds, but no messages were ever confirmed. The ocean guarded its secrets well, and it wasn't about to surrender them easily. When the debris was fully mapped, the Navy faced a difficult truth. The evidence didn't match every part of the story told in early reports. Certain components appeared more damaged than expected, while others were strangely intact. Some systems that were supposed to protect the submarine had clearly failed, but no one could agree on how or why exactly. The deeper the investigation went, the more inconsistencies appeared. In the end, the Thresher's discovery brought closure, but not peace. The Navy had found the wreck, yet the questions only grew louder. Was it a technical failure, human error, or something more complex? The sea had returned what it took, but in pieces too scattered to fully explain. However, as investigators studied the twisted remains, one thought lingered. Had they really uncovered the full story, or had they only found what the ocean allowed them to see? The cover-up begins. When the Thresher went missing, the Navy wasted no time, and within days, a court of inquiry was formed to figure out what had happened and to calm a nervous public. To everyone, the investigation looked careful and precise, packed with charts, witness statements, and confident voices. The Navy gave a neat explanation that made sense to everyone. Inside the courtroom, though, investigators were sifting through a mess of clues that didn't fit together. Each answer led to a new question, and some of those questions were quietly set aside before the public ever heard them. From the start, the spotlight fell on one possible culprit, and that is a silver-brazed pipe joint. They were cheaper and faster to use, and some had been installed in the Thresher's saltwater system. Investigators believed one of those joints might have cracked, letting seawater rush into key compartments, short out electrical systems, and shut down propulsion. It sounded like a tidy explanation. It was more like a mechanical failure that caused a quick, tragic chain reaction. It was a theory simple enough to reassure the public and technical enough to sound convincing. However, behind the scenes, not everyone was buying it. Some experts saw signs that electrical issues might have started before any flooding began. There were logs hinting at tripped circuits, faulty bus bars, and strange changes in reactor pump sounds. If that was true, it meant the story might have started with power failure, not seawater. Yet those details were quietly pushed aside. You see, the inquiry on the flooding theory was much easier to explain and defend. Electrical faults, which might have revealed deeper design flaws, were brushed off as side effects. Moving forward, a crucial piece of the mystery was literally buried in sound. The Navy's underwater listening network, known as SOSUS, had recorded the Thresher's final moments. Those recordings could show the order in which things went wrong, but they were classified. What made it out suggested that the reactor pumps may have gone silent before the flooding began. That small detail could have changed everything, but the public never saw the full data. When the report came out, it was stripped of those hints, leaving outsiders to guess what really happened under the waves. The official report blamed several factors without naming one clear cause. It said a failed pipe joint probably triggered flooding. An electrical short might have caused the reactor to shut down, cutting power, and the emergency blow system, meant to bring the sub back up, reportedly failed possibly because moisture in the airlines froze under pressure. The wording was giving no single cause and no direct blame. It was a shared tragedy, spread thin across multiple technical explanations. And with that, the Navy closed the case. Or at least, that's how it looked. Years later, declassified files started to tell a different story. Some SOSUS records hinted that electrical systems were faltering before any flooding sounds were detected. Internal reports pointed to damaged bus lines and mysterious electrical fluctuations. Reports from the USS Seawolf, which picked up faint banging noises during the search, were dismissed as background sounds, even though some thought they might have been signals from trapped men. Also, shipyard records added another layer of doubt. There were missing inspection signatures, misaligned valves, and rushed work logs. Those clues painted a picture of pressure, oversight gaps, and corners cut. For some Navy veterans and engineers, the final report felt too polished. It sounded less like a full truth and more like a version designed to protect confidence in the submarine fleet. The Cold War demanded stability, not doubt. So the complex reality, where human error, design flaws, and management pressure all mixed, was boiled down into a neat public message. Still, inside the Navy, the weight of those 129 lives was not forgotten. But out of that loss, something new came. The Navy built an entire safety system from the wreckage called the SubSafe program, and this changed everything. There were no more silver-brazed joints in vital systems, stricter testing, tighter material tracking, and tougher rules for welding and inspection. Even the emergency blow system was redesigned so it wouldn't freeze at depth. SubSafe became a promise written in steel and procedure that such a disaster would never happen again. And to be honest, it worked. Not one SubSafe certified submarine has been lost to an accident since. The program became a model of accountability, born from tragedy. Yet even with all those safeguards, there was still one question lingering. What parts of the Thresher's story were softened to protect the Navy's image? And if those early details were hidden, what else might still be sitting in a classified file, waiting to resurface? The Thresher's loss forced the Navy to face hard truths about its ambitions, but it also left behind a riddle that time hasn't fully solved. Because when you strip away the technical terms and the official language, what remains is the same haunting question that echoed through the fleet. How could the most advanced submarine of its time simply fall apart? In the deep? You'd think after all the reports, hearings, and headlines, there would be nothing left to uncover. Yet somewhere in the shadows of the archives, the story continued to write itself, and when those pages finally came into view, everything started to look different. The declassified documents. For years, the Thresher's story sat sealed away, buried in Navy archives and locked behind classification stamps. The official word was that all had been said that could be said. Yet behind those closed doors, thousands of pages of transcripts, reports, and photographs waited in silence. These were pages that could finally answer questions many believed would never see daylight again. And that silence broke in 2019 when retired Navy Captain James Bryant decided enough was enough. He took the fight to court, filing a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that challenged the Navy to release what it had kept secret for decades. It wasn't a move that was made lightly because Bryant had once served under the same institution, and he was now pressing for transparency. He believed the public deserved to know what really happened to the most advanced submarine of its time. Navy Captain James Bryant's case made its way through federal court until a judge finally ordered the Navy to release the files. The first batches began to arrive in 2020. It was small at first, then larger, more revealing, and increasingly difficult to ignore. Month after month, more fragments surfaced. Each release peeled away a layer of mystery, showing that what had long been buried wasn't conspiracy, but caution unheeded. The total would grow to over 1,700 pages of testimony, exhibits, and technical reviews. Inside those pages were inspection reports that felt chilling in hindsight. They listed problem areas that had been flagged months before the Thresher's final dive, which were faulty joints, unreliable valves, and equipment that failed safety tests but somehow still made the cut. Some engineers had spoken up about these flaws, raising red flags in design meetings and internal memos. Their concerns were logged, acknowledged, and quietly filed away. No one outside that small circle ever knew. The records also revealed something deeper. There was a weakness in the Thresher's emergency blow system, the very mechanism designed to save the submarine in a crisis. It turned out that the valves could freeze under pressure. Moisture trapped in the airlines could solidify in the cold ocean depths, preventing the system from forcing out ballast water fast enough to bring the vessel back up. Engineers had identified that risk before, but improvements were either slow, delayed, or incomplete. The new evidence painted a picture that many in the naval community had quietly suspected for years. There was no shadowy plot, no enemy sabotage. The Thresher's loss was the result of small oversights that added up. It was like a chain reaction of technical failures that left no room for recovery once it began. Now, it was clear that it wasn't a mystery that doomed the Thresher. It was engineering. And that truth, in its quiet devastation, was harder to accept than any theory of secrecy or sabotage. When asked about the findings, Navy officials responded carefully. They acknowledged the system flaws and the missed warnings, emphasizing that the loss had been studied extensively in later years to prevent another tragedy. The official stance was that the documents didn't prove a cover-up, but rather revealed how complex and unforgiving deep-sea engineering can be. It was mistakes that had claimed the ship. Still, as each new set of pages was unsealed, the story began to feel less like a closed chapter and more like a lesson rediscovered. The reports confirmed what observant engineers and families had suspected. The Thresher wasn't destroyed by mystery. It was undone by preventable weaknesses. The smoking gun wasn't hidden in some cloak and dagger file. It was sitting there in plain sight, written in maintenance logs and ignored warnings. So, when people now say the mystery is finally solved, it isn't about uncovering scandal or blame. It's about realizing that the answers were always there, waiting, recorded, and forgotten. The tragedy of the Thresher wasn't that the truth was hidden. It was that it took half a century for anyone to finally read it. Unveiling the Thresher's real story through declassified files is only half the journey. What happens after truth emerges? How does a loss become a lesson? The broader implications. Uncovering the Thresher's final secrets is one thing, but understanding what they mean for safety, memory, and accountability is another. The lessons stretch far beyond a sunken submarine. They reach into how institutions face failure, how they tell the truth, and how they honor the people lost along the way. When tragedy strikes, honesty is not optional. Every cover-up leaves scars deeper than the event itself. In the Thresher's case, the Navy's decision to keep key details locked away for decades didn't protect its reputation. It damaged trust. Families were left hanging, and the engineers who could have learned from the disaster were left guessing. The cost of secrecy was more than emotional. It slowed real change. In those early years, the Navy's official story was neat and controlled. It gave the public a version they could accept easily, one that avoided the uncomfortable truth. Yet underneath that tidy narrative lay unanswered questions. Why did it take years, even decades, before persistence from families, journalists, and retired officers to find out what exactly happened? And when the truth finally surfaced, it carried a heavy weight. 129 lives were lost because the system failed them. Still, something lasting came out of that pain. The disaster forced the Navy to face itself. From the wreck of the Thresher came a total rethinking of how submarines were built and tested. Safety stopped being a box to check and became a mission of its own. Engineers started working with a new mindset. They expected failure, found weakness, and questioned everything. Every year, those lessons are tied back to the men who never made it home. The Navy calls them on eternal patrol, a phrase that carries both pride and sorrow. Their names are remembered in ceremonies, in the minds of sailors, and in the practices that followed. In 2019, a national monument was dedicated at Arlington National Cemetery called the USS Thresher National Commemorative Monument. This monument stands not just for sorrow, but for the lessons they left behind. But then, if transparency only came after pressure and decades of grief, can we really say the system learned its lesson? Or did it simply learn how to hide better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. To enjoy more content like this, click on the next video on your screen.